Hello, I'm Steve. I'm an English teacher, and this is the C1 speaking exam, which I will be doing in class with my students this week. I say C1, the format is very similar at B2 and C2, so hopefully you will find something useful to practice here. We're going to do the exam, and I'm going to give you a little bit of, some phrases, some useful things to learn, but not just tell you phrases. You'll have to think a bit and do some grammar as well to make it a more immersive and complete class. So, what is the speaking exam? Well, I think we know by now. You speak to each other, you speak to the examiner, and these are the criteria that they mark the speaking exam on. And this is just a very fancy way of saying that you speak the language well, right? What does it mean to speak the language well? I think we all know what it means. You can communicate ideas and the other person understands you, and you can say things that are a bit more complicated in terms of nuanced, subtle ideas and differences in ideas. All of that is just put in a very fancy way in these criteria. And when I do this in class, I will be giving my students a score in each criteria so they have a good idea of what they're good at and what they need to improve. Because it's true, we don't often reflect on ourselves on what we need to improve, and it can be useful to have a teacher tell you, you need to make sure that you are using more introductory phrases to show that you're managing your discourse and things like that. So that would be quite useful for you if you had a teacher to do that for you. You can also think about it yourself and play with these a bit. But let's get into this. So for part one, we're going to have some general introduction questions in this exam on the topic of free time, such as describe how you use your phone in your free time, or do you have a particular happy place where you spend your free time, such as your bedroom or your school or your local youth club and so on. What would you do with the 25th hour in the day? 90% of teenagers are going to say sleep, which is a very good answer, but expand, justify, develop your answer. These are the kind of questions you'll have. Please give me your answer, record yourself, do this with a friend. As I said, these YouTube videos are the classes that I am teaching to my students at the moment, and then I'm uploading them anyway. So it will be interactive in my class. And then the students will have to do some work, because here are some sample answers, the kind of phrases that you might use in speaking part one for these questions. Talk about how you use your phone, talk about your happy place. And because it's speaking part one, I have made a use of English part one question. So pause the video and choose the best word A, B, C or D for these two use of English part one questions, testing your vocab. And of course the answers. The first question, the answer is tool, because we mean that it's like something that serves a specific purpose. It's a tool. And your happy place. This is a really typical C1 question that I've talked about in these videos before. Ways of walking. If it's relaxed, if it's your happy place and you're on a break from work, you are taking a stroll, because that means a relaxed, leisurely way of walking. To strut is to walk with confidence or arrogance. To ramble is to walk without a specific goal, often in the countryside, in the mountains. And to trudge is to walk or move with great difficulty, slowly. So the one that fits there is stroll. How did you do? Hopefully you learned a little something, and you maybe even learned some nice little expressions that you could use in the speaking exam. Let's move on to part two. We have 3 photos for C1. You are going to compare 2 of the photos and answer the 2 questions. I have a couple of videos on the technique for this part of the exam to make sure that you answer both questions and speak about 2 photos. So make sure you do that. Record yourself for 1 minute, compare 2 photos and say why people enjoy these hobbies and why some people might find them boring. And hopefully you've done that and you've spoken about typical ideas, like people enjoy relaxing in the countryside and fishing, or people might find playing video games boring because they can't relate to the situation and it all seems a bit unrealistic to them and pointless, and so on and so on. Or you might have said things like this. It is use of English part 1 again. I think in this first exam we'll do use of English part 1. Then in another speaking exam, in a future video, we'll do use of English part 2 to change it up a bit. Anyway, you've paused the video. These are really nice expressions. I've deliberately chosen expressions that you can use in different scenarios in the speaking exam. It's not all about fishing. You can use this expression to talk about any kind of hobby, free time, or anything like that. And of course, the answer is, I don't get the appeal. I don't get the appeal means I don't see why people like it. The other words don't quite fit. And the word that goes with on to mean addicted is hooked on. You're hooked on video games like Grand Theft Auto and Pokemon because they're rewarding, right? They give you that feeling of having completed something, even though maybe you haven't really. But we all like that feeling. So that's your speaking part 2. And then there would also be a second part with another student, but because this is one-on-one, we're skipping that today. As we move on to part 3, and in this part of the exam, I'd like you to imagine that you are going to spend a weekend in New York and talk together. This is where it's better if you're in class or you're doing this with your teacher. I'll be doing it with my students. As I said, I can talk with them. Talk together about why you would like to do these different things in your weekend in New York. And you have about 2 minutes for this and then 1 minute to make a decision, such as the must visit place or the best activity that you simply can't miss. Pause the video, do your speaking, and hopefully you'll be saying things like this on these different topics. You move from the different options and give your opinion and ask a question and so on. And you say things like, I'm amazed by the work behind the of a Broadway show, talking about musicals on Broadway. The answer is behind the scenes. Behind the scenes is the phrase that means the part you don't see, the preparation of a theatre performance. And number 2, this is a nice little expression, isn't it? What do you do with the views from the top of a skyscraper? You absorb them. You take them in, to take in the views. A nice expression when we're talking about tourism and visiting places and so on. So I hope you did well there on both the speaking and the little grammar questions. As we move on to part 4, which is going to be some slightly more detailed questions related to the theme of part 3, which in this case, of course, was travel. So you might have more deeper questions where you can expand your answers a bit more, open it up. You can have a conversation with your partner here. You can give your opinion and say, what do you think, and so on. This is a really interesting question. These are things that people talk about in life. That's why they're on the English exam. Do you go to the same place on holiday year after year, or do you try to visit new places? And tell me why, and give me an example, and give me a counter example on the other hand, and develop your answers as we need to do in the speaking exam. Do you start missing home when you're on holiday? For me, like after a week, I start thinking, well, the holiday is really nice, but sort of want to get home, want to get back to my home comforts and so on. And what are the problems you can face on holiday? What makes it difficult for some people and for a lot of people at some times? And hopefully you are saying things like this. Pause the video, choose the best answer. Here come the answers. Of course, there is a wide range, typical Cambridge B2 C1 expression. And the second sentence, were you listening to what I said? Because I did give you a little clue. These are the home comforts. And yeah, we like to be at home with everything how we like it, don't we? Okay, that's the end of your speaking exam. I hope that was useful. See you next week.